Hello friends, thank you for joining my friend Emilio Alvarez and myself, Tom Thibodeau, on the Viterbo University Servant Leadership channel, in which we are offering inspiration and information, encouragement and engagement as you do the good work of serving and leading other people, working for a greater good every day. Our topic today, servant leaders are storytellers. Servant leaders are storytellers. A high school English teacher brought his class, a junior class, out to a nursing home in this rural community because he wanted the students to get an oral history of the community in which they lived. Staff brought out an older man in his wheelchair and an older woman, and he began asking questions, and the older man and the older woman began talking. After about 45 minutes, the older man looked at the older woman and said, "I think we ought to stop. We might be boring these kids." And the old woman shot up in her chair and she said, "Nonsense, nonsense." And then she looked at each of those students. "If at the end of your life you don't got any good stories, what do you got? At the end of your career, you don't got any good stories, what do you got? At the end of a semester, you don't got any good stories, ask for your tuition back." Our lives are stories. All of our lives have a beginning. All of our lives have a middle. All of our lives have an end. All of our lives are filled with comedy and tragedy, joy and sorrow, promise and disappointment. All of our lives have extraordinary moments, and all of our lives have the experience of the mundane, the everyday. And yet, in all of those experiences, there are stories to be told. In all of our organizations, there are stories that need to be told and relived. Let's never forget where we came from. Let's not forget about our founders. Let's not forget about the sacrifices, the innovations that were necessary in order for us to continue to be here today. Here at Viterbo University, we are constantly reminded of our founders, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who came to this community in the 1860s and in 1890 founded their college to be able to teach teachers, to be able to prepare nurses, to be able to prepare people in the fine arts in order to enhance the lives of the community. And they talk about those founders, how steadfast and courageous, how stubborn and committed, how powerful and prayerful they all are. And we inherit those stories. And now it's for those of us who are here now to share those stories with people who come to join us. Noel Tichy, who teaches leadership and management at the University of Michigan, did a study of companies that had orientations. And for one company, they brought a group in, and for 8 hours they went through the policy manual. They brought a second group in, and what they did in the morning, they went through the policy manual, but in the afternoon, they told stories of the company. In the third company, they brought everybody in, and they just told them stories for 8 hours. They reconvened the groups 6 months later. And what group would you suppose remembered the most of their orientation? Of course, it was the group who had spent 8 hours listening to and telling the stories of the organization that they were entering. What we understand by research is that children who understand their family story well have a greater sense of resilience. We gather strength from our ancestors. It's extraordinary. In this month of February, we are celebrating Black History Month, and we're telling the stories that oftentimes weren't told. People who made sacrifices that were life-changing. Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, Ella Baker, Martin Luther King. Isn't it amazing? All those names are familiar, but do we know their stories, what they stood for, and what they sacrificed for our country? The stories of Native peoples, the stories of immigrant people, our own stories, are all sacred and precious. We become the stories we tell. Why do we tell stories? Well, first, we remember them. Human beings are flesh and blood, memory and hope. Oh, I remember one. Oh, that happened to me once. Once upon a time draws us back and recreates those memories, brings the past into the present, and gives us strength. One of the most painful diseases is Alzheimer's, when we go and visit the people we love and their memory is gone. The memories are not there. Something of their humanity is lost. We tell stories because it tells us how to live. It's the moral of the story. Well, when I was your age, and the elders will tell a story about what they did, but oftentimes it was a story maybe in terms of hard traveling or failure and the lesson learned in the process, the moral of the story. A teacher was talking to her students about the moral of the story and giving those students all kinds of examples. It was a 5th grade class. And she said, well, now classes, somebody give me an example of a moral of the story. And a little girl raised her hand and she said, yes. What is it? And she said, well, I live on a farm, and I was told to go out and collect the eggs, and I went out with a big basket, and I came back, I tripped and I fell and I broke all the eggs. So I learned not to put all my eggs in one basket. Oh, very good, the teacher said. Second boy raised his hand and said, I live on a farm too, and my dad sent me out to milk, and I had 2 pails instead of the big can, and I filled them both up, and I came back and I tripped and I spilled the milk. I didn't cry because I've learned not to cry over spilt milk. Oh, that's wonderful, she said. Another little boy raised his hand. She said, yes, Johnny, what is it? She said, well, my granddad, he was on Iwo Jima, and my granddad, he was stuck in a foxhole with 10 of his buddies, and they were all wounded. My granddad had a gun with 10 bullets, and he had a canteen full of whiskey, and he drank his whiskey, and he started shooting at the enemy, and then he came to him, and he punched him, and he kicked. Wait a minute, Johnny, what's the moral of that story? Well, you don't mess with my granddad when he's been drinking. Isn't it amazing how many times we understand that there's always humor in a child, a joke, and a glass of wine. But understand this, we tell stories because remember them. Jesus' parables, the moral of the story, this is how you should live. And finally, we tell stories because it changes us. As we tell the story over and again, we are changed. Some of the most significant groups in our country are anonymous groups. The reason we don't know about what takes place in these groups is because they are anonymous. But people who are in recovery each stand up and tell stories, oftentimes stories that they are not proud of, oftentimes stories that have caused great pain, embarrassment, and shame. But in the telling of the story, healing takes place. Stories transform us. My youngest daughter, when she was a senior in college, decided to run a marathon. She was getting into shape and she was running, much like her older sister had done, who she admired, who had run a marathon. And so La Crosse was having its first marathon in May. 2 weeks before the marathon in mid-April, my father-in-law, her grandfather, had a serious heart attack and was in the hospital recovering in Madison. He took about a week and then he got out. And his daughter had come from Colorado, who was a nurse, to take care of her dad. And before she was leaving, he knew that Grandpa should have the opportunity to come to La Crosse. He wanted to get out. So she drove him over to La Crosse, but it was on the same day as the marathon. Our youngest daughter, sometimes, I missed a lot of the things that she was participating in. And I think that she felt rejected. It was because of work or other levels of responsibility. And as I think back at it now, I have a number of regrets. But now Grandpa's coming, who's just got out of the hospital, and she's running a marathon. So we got down there early because I could watch at least half of the marathon, and there our daughter was at the 3-mile mark. That a girl, Danielle, you got it. And she looks at us. She's strong. I see her at the 7-mile mark. There you go, Danielle. She looks up and she gives us thumbs up. We get over and at the 12-mile mark, how you doing, Danielle? And she kind of looks and she smiles. And then we see her at the 18-mile mark. Come on, Danielle. And then she goes and goes, she's hurting. She's had it. She's in pain. And we have to leave. How many times was I not there when she needed me most. But Grandpa was coming. My wife wanted to hurry home so she could care for her father and sister. So we went home, and our youngest daughter continued to run. And she got to mile 19, where our oldest daughter and her boyfriend were. And our youngest daughter started to run over to the side to her sister, and she said, "I'm gonna quit, I can't go any further." And our oldest daughter took the keys of her car, threw them to their boyfriend and said, "Meet us at the end," and looked at her young sister and said, "You're not quitting. You've come too far. You've worked too hard. This race is yours." And for the next 7 miles, she ran stride for stride with her younger sister, continued to whisper in her ear, "You got this. I'm so proud of you. You worked so hard. Come on, let's go." They crossed the finish line together. She got her medal. She got her certificate. But for the rest of her life, she knows that her sister is running with her. For the rest of her life, she knows that she's not alone, that there's a love of a family who's committed to her for the long haul, for the marathon. All of you have stories to tell. There are no storytellers. There's just stories, and all of us gets to carry one around for a while. What are the stories of your family of which you are a steward? What are the stories of your organization that they need to be told, retold, and celebrated? Thank you so much for listening. Until we meet again, peace and all good.